They say Ned Stark died on the steps of Beller's Sept, that his head rolled before a crowd too stunned to breathe. That honor died with him, and the 7 kingdoms drowned in chaos. But that's not the whole truth. The truth is colder. It began in the black cell beneath the Red Keep. Time meant nothing there. No moonlight, no sound, but the drip of distant water. He waited for death, whispered prayers to the old gods, and thought only of his children. Yet in those last moments, someone else came. Not Varys, not Eddard's wife, not even death. A man with eyes pale as frost, a face carved from shadow. He called himself the First Shadow, and he offered Ned a bargain life in exchange for something deeper than death. "I can give you one more chance," the stranger said, "to return to the north, to protect your blood. But not as a man, not as Ned Stark." Ned, weakened by days of rot and regret, listened. "You will be ice," the man continued, "cold and eternal. You will not remember mercy, only the mission." Ned refused. He swore it. But when the axe came down, something changed. The world didn't go black. It went white. They buried his body in the crypts of Winterfell. His bones never reached the north. Not really. The cart that carried his remains vanished in the snows outside Moat Cailin. The men who rode with it were found days later frozen, their eyes wide open, their mouths twisted in silent screams. But no one asked questions. War was everywhere. Robb Stark marched south. Catelyn wept in silence. And Jon Snow stood watch beyond the wall. None of them knew that something had awakened in the deep north. That night, beyond the wall, the winds shifted. The others felt it first. The ancient cold pulsed through the snow like a heartbeat. In the silence, they turned their heads toward the frozen mountains, where a figure stood still as death itself, his eyes glowing faint blue, his cloak torn and frozen, yet marked with the direwolf sigil of House Stark. He did not speak. Not at first. But when he raised his hand, the dead obeyed. Rumors began to spread from the haunted forest to Craster's Keep, whispers of a new Night King, but different from the one they feared before. This one walked with purpose. This one didn't just kill. He searched. For what? No one knew. Samwell Tarly read about it in the old texts. "There is a tale," he told Jon, "of a man who was once bound by duty, honor, and love, but those things were burned from him when death took him not once, but twice. He became something more, something twisted by ice and sorrow." Jon laughed then. But he didn't laugh when he found the frozen direwolf in the snow, its eyes glowing faint blue. Ghost growled. The wind whispered something that chilled Jon to the marrow. A single word, brother. Far north, in a keep of ice and silence, the Night King stood before an altar made of bones. Around him, the White Walkers bowed not out of fear, but reverence. In his hand, he held a blade not made of ice, but of iron and memory. Ned Stark's greatsword Ice, reforged by some foul magic. The same sword that once executed traitors, now pulsed with the power to raise armies. He remembered things, faces, names, a red-haired girl, a wolf, a bastard son, a lie that broke a kingdom, but they were flickers, dying embers. What burned now was colder than fire. He would march south, not to destroy, but to reclaim. Snow fell in endless silence as the wind howled across the haunted forest. Beneath that wind, a shadow moved, a tall figure draped in tattered northern furs. Frost laced through the strands of his beard, a crown of thorns carved from ice, pressing into his skull. His steps left no mark. The cold didn't touch him. He was the cold, and the dead followed him. They marched behind him, not with rage, but with obedience. Not whites, not beasts, soldiers. each one an echo of a life taken too soon. Wildlings, rangers, and even the dead of Hardhome, their eyes lit by the same blue fire that burned behind the face that once belonged to Eddard Stark. But he was no longer Ned. Not truly. He remembered who he had been. Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, a man of quiet honor and impossible burdens. But those memories were buried beneath the ice like bones under snow, intact but frozen. Only fragments reached the surface. A face young, with auburn hair. Sansa, a boy with a sword too big for him. Bran, and always Jon, the boy who wasn't his, but whom he loved like a son. That name echoed through his mind now, as he stood at the edge of the wall, looking up at the colossal barrier of stone and ice. His ancient enemies, the Night's Watch, still guarded it. But this time, there was no fear in their hearts, only confusion. For the Night King did not charge. He did not raise his hands to summon destruction. He simply stood. On top of the wall, Jon Snow watched through narrowed eyes, his hand resting on Longclaw's hilt. He'd seen the Night King before. He'd seen what he could do. But this one was different. His figure, his face, it sparked something painful, something unspoken. Tormund stepped beside him. Why's he just standing there? Jon didn't answer, because deep in his gut, he already knew. He could see it now through the howling winds and swirling snow. That wasn't the same Night King who raised his arms at Hardhome. That wasn't some mindless ancient evil. That face. Jon stumbled back. His breath caught. His voice cracked when he whispered, "That's Ned Stark." Castle Black buzzed with panic. Some thought it a trick, a glamour, a mind game. But Mesteret confirmed what Jon feared. "It's him," the old man muttered, holding a raven feathered scroll with trembling hands. "I don't know how, but the dead walk behind the man who once ruled Winterfell." Jon stared into the fire. "He was executed. I saw his head. I saw ... You saw what they wanted you to see." Mesteret leaned forward. "If what the old texts say is true, the first Night King wasn't born of hate. He was born of betrayal, a sacrifice. The kind of pain that cracks the soul like ice cracks stone." Jon clenched his jaw. "What does he want?" "That," the Maester whispered, "is what frightens me most. Because maybe he doesn't want to destroy us. Maybe he wants to bring us with him." That night, Jon descended the wall alone. He didn't tell the others. He didn't explain. He only carried Longclaw and a single question. If the man standing among the dead was truly Ned Stark, could he still be saved? The snow parted for him like it was waiting. And when he stepped into the clearing, the army of the dead did not move. Only the Night King did. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully, almost like a father approaching a frightened child. Jon raised Longclaw, but he didn't swing. His breath came out in clouds. The Night King stopped just feet away, their eyes locked. "You're not him," Jon said. The Night King tilted his head. Jon's voice cracked. "You're not my father." And for a moment, just a flicker, the thing wearing Ned Stark's face blinked. Not like a monster. Not like a demon, but like a man. A whisper escaped from the Night King's frozen lips, so soft it nearly vanished in the wind. "Jon." Jon's heart stopped. The whisper cut through the wind like a dagger, soft, raspy, and utterly impossible. That voice, it wasn't the voice of a wight. It wasn't the moan of a corpse. It was his. It was Ned Stark. Jon stepped back, his sword trembling in his grip. "Say it again," he demanded. "Say my name." The Night King didn't answer immediately. His mouth opened slightly, but the sound caught like something frozen inside. His face twitched just once like it was trying to remember how to feel, or to fake it. Behind him, the dead stood still as statues. None moved. None breathed. Even the wind seemed to pause, like the world was waiting to see what happened next. John. This time it was louder, clearer, sharper, and John saw it. Behind those glowing blue eyes, for just one heartbeat, there was a flicker of warmth. Memory. Something human. And then it was gone. Back on the wall, the Night's Watch waited for a slaughter that never came. Tormund leaned over the edge, peering through the flurry. Why hasn't he killed John yet? No one answered. Then the horns blew once, and again. Not for wildlings. Not for enemies. For a rider returning alone. John. He passed through the gate on a horse of black fur and steaming breath. And riding behind him, tied in ropes of dragonglass and steel, was a single captive, a corpse, dressed in Stark colors, draped in old furs, and unmistakable. It was Ned Stark's body, but his eyes no longer glowed. His skin had paled, frostbitten and stretched thin. Whatever life or curse had animated him outside, the wall had flickered out the moment he crossed through Castle Black's gate. John said nothing. He walked away from the gate, locked himself in his chambers, and didn't speak for hours. When he finally emerged, he looked shattered, older, broken. Sam met him in the hallway. Was it really him? John nodded, slowly. He knew my name. That doesn't mean it was him. He looked at me like he remembered everything. Sam hesitated. Then why did he let you go? John stared past him. I think, could have. He wanted to be caught. That night, John stood beside the corpse of his father in the silent crypt beneath Castle Black. He stared at the stillness of the face, the thin white hair, the mouth frozen half open. I thought you died for honor. John whispered, but you didn't die at all. You became something else. Why? Of course, there was no answer, but Sam had one. Sort of. I found something, he said, holding up a leather-bound book. A fragment from Old Town. It speaks of a Night King who is not made, but reborn. A soul torn by duty, resurrected. By the children of the forest, not as a weapon against men, but as a weapon against fate. What does that mean? John asked. It means maybe he wasn't marching south to destroy us. Maybe he was marching south to end himself. John looked at the body. Then why stop outside the wall? Sam flipped to the last page. Because the wall holds more than ice. It holds secrets. And some things aren't allowed to die until the truth is known. 2 nights later, the body was gone. No signs of escape. No broken chains. Just melted frost, a patch of dried blood, and a single black feather. And far beyond the wall, under the shadow of a frozen weirwood tree, the Night King stood once more. Only now, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood not just the dead, but 3 figures cloaked in white fire, the ghosts of old kings. The North was remembering its dead, and they were answering a call. The wind howled louder now. Not the wild screech of storms, but a deeper, older sound like something ancient had awakened and was moving beneath the ice. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the wall again, but this time he wasn't staring down at enemies. He was staring down at history. The body of Ned Stark had vanished, without a trace. The ropes, the dragonglass, the guarded cell, none of it mattered. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole, or something colder had claimed him back. But that wasn't the part that shook Jon to his core. It was the dreams. The ones that started the same night the corpse disappeared. He stood alone in the middle of Winterfell's godswood. The weirwood tree wept blood again, and its red eyes stared through him. Snow fell upward instead of down. His breath fogged the air, and then, in the blink of a moment, the godswood froze into black ice. Then he saw him. Ned Stark, still dressed, in furs and leather, only now crowned with thorns of frost. His face was blank, his eyes colorless, neither glowing blue nor human brown. "I did it for you," the dream Ned said, voice echoing through the branches like wind cracking through stone. "For the realm, for the lie." Jon tried to speak, but his throat was frozen shut. Ned stepped forward. "You were never meant to know, but the wall was never meant to hold back the dead. It was built to hold back the truth." Then he vanished. Jon woke gasping, sweat freezing on his chest, blood on his tongue. The next morning, Jon made a choice. He called a meeting. Tormund, Sam, Mesteret, a few of the Watch's remaining loyal rangers. "I need to go north," he said. Mester Et frowned. "To chase a ghost?" Jon shook his head. "Not just a ghost, my father, or what's left of him." "You saw what he is," Tormund said. "You bring back that thing again, and the wall might not hold." Jon turned to Sam. "You said something, that the wall holds secrets, that it was built for more than just the White Walkers." Sam nodded slowly. "There are texts, forgotten ones. The original builders, Bran the Builder, and the first men believed something darker than the Elith. Night King lay beneath the ice. A rift in the world, a place where souls don't rest." Tormund spat on the floor. "So you want to go walking into that?" Jon didn't hesitate. "If there's a chance Ned Stark is trapped between life and death, then yes." Sam glanced. "Toward the fire. You'll need dragonglass." "And the horn of winter?" Ed scoffed. "That's a myth." Sam shook his head. "Maybe, maybe not. But if it exists, it's north of the wall, buried with the first Night King." Jon's voice dropped. "Then that's where I go." They left at dusk. Jon, Tormund, Sam, and 6 sworn brothers of the Watch. They passed through the gates with heavy hearts. Behind them, Castle Black was quiet too quiet. Jon looked back once, thinking of Ghost, of Gilly and her child, of it, dead walking with familiar faces. Then he pressed forward. Beyond the wall, everything felt wrong. The cold was thicker. The snow didn't melt on skin it bit. Shapes moved in the trees, too fast for the eye to follow. The air itself carried a hum, like a whisper underneath everything. They found the first body 2 days in. A White Walker shattered into pieces, as if ripped apart from within. But not by steel, not by fire, by something older. Sam studied. "The remains. This wasn't a fight," he murmured. "This was a sacrifice." Tormund frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means something's feeding off them." Jon's skin crawled. "Feeding off the dead?" Sam looked up. "Feeding off their memories." That night, the dreams returned. This time, Jon stood at the base of the wall. Only it wasn't made of ice, it was made of bones. Stark bones, thousands of them. And at the top, the Night King stood holding a crown of snow. He didn't speak. He just dropped something from his hands. Jon looked down and saw it fall. It was Loneclaw, melted. By the 5th day beyond the wall, nothing felt real anymore. Jon's boots crunched through snow that never seemed to thaw, even near the fires. Their supplies had frozen solid. The trees looked like dead men with reaching arms, and the silence had begun to feel alive, like something was watching them just out of sight, just beyond hearing. They passed the corpse of a mammoth frozen mid-charge, icicles hanging from its tusks like knives. Sam muttered prayers beneath his breath, and even Tormund, giant of a man, unshaken by death, stayed close to the others. Whatever land they walked now, it wasn't just north of the wall. It was somewhere older, deeper, cursed. That night, the campfire barely caught. The wind howled louder, and strange sounds echoed through the trees clicking, like bones tapping stone. Sam clutched his books. Tormund sharpened his axe, and Jon dreamed again. This time, he stood in the crypts of Winterfell. The torches flickered, casting long shadows over the ancient dead. He walked past Lyanna's tomb, past Rickard's, past Brandon and Benjen. At the end, a new tomb waited. No name, just a direwolf sigil etched into black ice. He reached out to touch it. It opened. Inside lay Ned Stark, but younger. His hair dark, his face unwrinkled, eyes closed, sleeping, and they opened, and they were blue. "I kept your secret," Dream Ned said softly. "But secrets have a price." Jon stepped back. "You became him." "No," Ned whispered. "He became me." Jon's throat closed. What does that mean? But the crypt was already collapsing, and as the roof fell, Ned Stark reached out and said, "The truth was buried under ice. And now it's waking." Jon bolted awake, breath ragged, blade drawn. He turned and froze. There were footprints in the snow right beside him, leading away from his bedroll, through the trees, and into the white beyond. But no one else was awake, and no one else had moved. He followed them. The prince led him into a clearing filled with dead trees. In the center stood a weirwood, unlike any Jon had ever seen. Its bark was black as night. Its leaves were bone-white. And its face, the carved face, was weeping blood-red tears of ice. Beneath it knelt a man in tattered Stark armor. Long gray hair, broad shoulders, a sword across his knees. Jon's breath hitched. "Ned?" The man looked up. But it wasn't his father. Not entirely. It was what was left of him. His eyes weren't blue anymore. Not glowing, but not alive either. Clouded, pale, trapped between worlds. He spoke without moving his lips. "You shouldn't have followed me." Jon stepped forward, choking back everything inside him. "You're my father." "No," the voice answered. "I was once. But the wall took that from me. The gods, or what we thought were gods, they made me into something else. Not king, not man." Jon swallowed hard. Why? To hold back the deeper dark. Not the whites, not the walkers. Something worse. Something sleeping under the ice. Jon shook his head. "Then why raise the dead?" "Because I needed an army. To fight." "For you?" "To fight me." The black weirwood behind them began to shake. Roots cracked the earth. And from below, the snow began to melt, not from heat, but from something alive beneath it. Something massive, something breathing. The ground pulsed. Jon turned in horror. "What is it?" Ned Stark, the ghost of him, looked Jon in the eyes. The truth. Then the ice exploded. From the earth burst a skeletal thing the size of a keep. Not dragon, not man. Something ancient, half buried in frost and memory. Covered in broken shields, bones, swords, a grave beast, born of war and hate. Tormund and the others rushed in at the sound, eyes wide. Jon raised Lone Claw. But the creature didn't strike. It just stood, towering, breathing, waiting, and inside its ribs, something glowed. A horn, black, carved from the bones of the first men, etched in old tongue. Sam whispered in awe, "The horn of winter." Jon stepped forward. "That's why you raised the dead? To dig this thing up?" Ned nodded once. "Because this is how the wall falls. Not with fire, not with siege, but with the truth." The wind died the moment Jon touched the horn. Not a breeze stirred. Not even. The trees whispered. The great beast made of bones and frost stood still as a monument, its ribs pulsing with a strange, icy light, like a heart beating once every 1,000 years. Jon looked up at it, and for a moment he understood. This creature wasn't alive. It was memory, a grave built from centuries of lies. And the horn of winter? It was the key to all of it. Sam was shaking beside him. "John, if you blow that horn, the wall won't just fall. Everything might fall. The dead, the living, the magic holding this world together." John didn't answer. He looked at the horn, black as obsidian veins, of deep red running through it. Old magic, the kind even the children of the forest feared. He looked over his shoulder, and there he was, Ned Stark, standing just beyond the clearing, silent, watching, no longer the Night King, no longer just a man. A curse wrapped in honor, a ghost trying to stop what he'd failed to stop in life. John held the horn in both hands. "This ends with me," he said. Tormund barked. "You sure you want to do this, Crow? There's no unblowing a damn death horn." John glanced back at him. "I was dead once already. Maybe this is the only way to stay that way." Without another word, he raised the horn to his lips. It was heavier than it looked, soaked in sorrow, dripping with silence. Then he blew. It wasn't a sound. It was a shudder. The world itself groaned. The trees cracked. The beast beneath the horn roared, but not in rage. In relief. Like something bound too long had finally been set free. And then, in the distance, the wall began to scream. Yes, scream. Not collapse, not shatter. It wailed like a living thing dying in slow agony. From Eastwatch to Castle Black to Shadow. Tower, cracks spread through the ancient ice like veins of lightning. Magic unraveled in every direction. Runes blinked out. Ghost wards failed. The frost wept. And then boom. The wall exploded, not in fire, but in wind. A great icy shockwave burst outward, ripping through forest and mountain, flattening trees, tossing snow like ash in a volcano. John fell to his knees. Blood dripped from his nose, his ears. Tormund was yelling. Sam was on the ground, clutching his head. The others? Screaming or silent. And in the silence after the blast, John heard a voice that wasn't his father's. It was older. It had no mouth, no name, only hunger. Now, we remember. The sky darkened, not from night, from clouds. Thick, pulsing clouds that weren't clouds at all. Shadows. Shapes. Like forgotten gods waking up from beneath the crust of the world. And then the dead rose. Not just whites, not just white walkers, but everyone. Every soldier who had died beyond the wall. Every wildling. Every night's watch ranger. Every child of the forest buried beneath roots and snow. They rose, but not in fury, in obedience. And standing before them, at the front of the army, was Ned Stark, crowned again, his face calm, his voice louder. Then thunder. The wall was never built to keep the dead out. It was built to keep the truth in. Back at Castle Black, chaos reigned. Ravens screamed in the sky. Brothers of the Watch fled as the magic in their bones turned to frost. Doors slammed shut. Fires died. And above it all, a low hum began to shake the stone coming from beneath the wall. In the depths of the Black Keep, something old cracked open. A prison, a gate, a mouth. And through it, crawling from the depths, came the cold that thinks. John stood again, the horn still in his hand, blood still in his mouth. He looked at the dead army, looked at his father, looked at the weirwood bleeding black. Then he understood. The White Walkers weren't the apocalypse. They were the warning. And the true enemy wasn't death. It was truth. Truth powerful enough to kill gods. Truth so raw, it turned the most. Honorable man in Westeros into a frozen king. Truth so deep, it could only be hidden in a wall, 100 leagues long and 8,000 years old. And now it was free. Snow no longer fell. It hovered. suspended in mid-air, as if time itself had paused to watch what came next. Jon stood among frost and ruin, his breath shallow, blood crusting at the corner of his mouth. Behind him, the horn of winter lay cracked. In half-spent, the wall was gone. Not shattered, but erased like a scar that had finally scabbed off after centuries of silence. Nothing stood between the north and the realm now. Nothing but the walking dead. And him. The army of the risen stood motionless, silent, awaiting someone. And then Ned Stark moved. He stepped forward, ice cracking beneath each footfall. His face was calm, but behind the stillness was something burning. Not fire, not vengeance, truth. His voice carried with unnatural weight, not loud, but impossible to ignore. The wall was a lie. The wars, the kings, the gods, all built on a lie that began with fire and was buried in ice. Jon tried to speak, but his voice came out. Hoarse. What lie? Ned looked at him with eyes that weren't his, but held pieces of who he'd been. You are not my son, but I loved you like one. That was my first betrayal, and my last. Jon shook his head. You protected me. I hid you, Ned corrected, because I thought it was mercy. But mercy, Jon, is just cowardice with good manners. Jon's stomach twisted. He had waited his whole life for the truth, and now that it was here, it stung worse than any sword. As Ned turned, the army behind him began to move not to attack, but to march. South, not in rage, not in hunger, but in purpose. Jon followed, flanked by Tormund and Sam. No one spoke, not even the dead. It was like being caught in a procession of ghosts that remembered everything they died for, and now demanded retribution, not in blood, but in revelation. By the time they reached the ruins of Eastwatch, word had already spread. Ravens flew from every outpost, lords huddled in their keeps. Winterfell prepared for siege, but the dead never attacked. They passed the castles. They passed the towns. They passed Winterfell itself. They didn't burn. They didn't kill. They didn't touch a single soul. They only walked. And the people watched, thousands of them, staring in horror and awe as their ancestors, their heroes, their villains, their forgotten dead marched back across the north. At the Trident, Jon confronted Ned again. Why? He demanded. Why come south if you don't want to fight? Because Westeros was built on the wrong name, Ned said. And that name was Aegon. Jon's mouth went dry. You don't just carry a Targaryen name, Jon, Ned said. You carry their lie. Jon blinked. What lie? That they were saviors. Ned turned toward the horizon. They weren't. They were the jailers of this world. The dragons weren't born to free men. They were born to keep us silent. That night, Jon sat by the fire with Sam, while the dead formed a silent perimeter around their camp. The weight of it all sank into him. This isn't a war, Jon said. No, Sam agreed. It's a reckoning. Jon looked up. Then why do I still feel like we've already lost? Sam closed his book. Because the world was easier. When the bad ones were monsters, and the good ones died noble deaths. But what if it was never that simple? Jon didn't answer, because deep down, he already knew it wasn't. Far south, in King's Landing, ravens crashed through stained glass windows. A Mester screamed. Scrolls turned to ash in the fire. Queen Daenerys stood atop her balcony, with dragons circling overhead, and she felt it. Not just fear, dread, a sense that something old and holy had cracked in half. Then she saw them, the dead, marching into the Riverlands, thousands of them, led by a man she had only seen in dreams. Ned Stark, still walking, still unbothered, by her dragons, still carrying the face of every sin Westeros ever buried. And Jon, he had stopped trying to change fate. Because he realized now, he was part of it, not the hero, not the king, the witness. And witnesses weren't meant to stop the storm. They were meant to remember it. One last march remains. The gates of King's Landing had never seen such silence. The gold cloaks stood frozen along the walls, their spears drooping, their courage draining from their faces like melted snow. No horns blew, no cries rang out, no defense was mounted. Because how do you fight what you don't understand? The dead did not run. They did not roar. They did not siege. They arrived. Line after line of the long dead marched through the outer fields. Children with wooden swords. Old kings still wearing rusted crowns. Peasants who once tilled the reach. Northerners, Dornishmen, even the Dothraki, dead from the long night, rode silently behind. But they weren't there to conquer. They were there to testify. At the head of them all, Ned Stark walked through the gates of the capital he once despised. No sword in hand, no armor, no crown, just his weathered face, pale and cracked with frost, and the eyes that had once taught Jon Snow what honor meant. Now they burned with only one mission left: truth. Daenerys stood atop the Red Keep, watching. Drogon snarled beside her, smoke curling from his nostrils. Tyrion watched from behind, half horrified, half captivated. "That's Ned Stark," he whispered. "Dead 20 years. And now he comes to take my throne?" Dany growled. But even as she said it, her voice faltered. Because the dead weren't coming for the Iron Throne. They didn't look at it, didn't seem to see it. They were coming for the people. By the next morning, the streets were filled, not with violence, but with silence. Every man, woman, and child stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the army of the dead. Then Ned Stark stepped forward. He raised his hand, not to command, but to speak. And when he opened his mouth, everyone heard him. Not with their ears, with their blood. This kingdom was built on ashes. The truth buried beneath fire, stone, and silence. No longer. In the square of Beller's Sept, where Ned had once been executed, the dead began to speak. One by one, they stepped forward and gave their truths. A Stark bannerman who was promised land but killed for loyalty. A wildling girl burned alive for the gods of the South. A Mester who knew Rhaegar and Lyanna's secret, but was strangled in silence. A child murdered in Flea Bottom for sport. One after another, the lies spilled forth. A flood of rot that had festered for centuries. And the living listened, wept, broke. Jon stood at the edge of the crowd, ghost-like in his black cloak. This was no battle, no rebellion. This was confession at the end of the world. He turned to Sam. "They're not here to punish us." "No," Sam murmured. "They're here to force us to live with what we did." That night, the Iron Throne stood alone. No king, no queen, no guards, and yet it burned. Without torch, without flame, it melted, collapsed into molten steel, as if the lies it was forged from had finally caught fire. And from the smoke, the dead began to vanish. One by one, freed, released, their truth spoken, their duty done. All except one. Ned Stark remained. He walked the streets until dawn, looking at the city he had once died for. Then he found Jon, standing in the godswood of the Red Keep. Jon didn't speak. Ned did. "I failed you. In life. In death. I kept you hidden when the world needed you revealed." Jon's eyes burned. "You were trying to protect me." "I was trying to protect me," Ned said softly, "from what it meant if you were more than just a bastard. From what would come next." Jon looked at the ghost that had once been his father. "You want me to rule?" "No," Ned said. "I want you to remember." Jon blinked. "Remember what?" Ned smiled, just a little. That the dead speak only when the living refuse to. And then he was gone. No flash. No cry, just gone. And the snow, for the first time in years, began to melt. Epilogue. They rebuilt not with steel, but with truth. The kingdoms were not ruled by one. They were guided by many. The old gods were buried. The new ones questioned. The wall was never rebuilt, because there was nothing left to hold back. Jon Snow never sat on a throne. He never took a crown. He walked north one final time, into the heart of the forest, carrying only a broken horn, and the memory of a man who had once taught him honor, then showed him what it cost. And far beyond the woods, beneath a weirwood that no longer bled, he whispered one last truth into the snow. My name is Aegon Targaryen, but I was raised by Ned Stark, and that is the only name I'll ever answer to.